Chapter 76. Xianxia retreated 20 meters before stopping. Now that he was no longer able to maintain his originally calm face had turned pale. After all, the difference in strength between him and the middle-aged man was simply too great. He could only rely on his movement skills to contend with the middle-aged man. When he had clashed with the middle-aged man's saint weapon, Xianxia had suffered quite a bit. Although the saint weapon was not damaged, the middle-aged man's saint chi was several times stronger than Xianxia's through the light wind sword. Xianxia's internal organs had been shaken and he had suffered some minor injuries. The middle-aged man steadied himself and looked at Xianxia with a serious expression. Facing this person who had almost caused him to suffer 3 times in a row, the middle-aged man did not dare to underestimate him. Although the latter's strength was weak in the eyes of the middle-aged man, his speed was not any slower than his own and his attacks were extremely fast. The middle-aged man's threat was even greater than his own opponent's. However, when the middle-aged man saw Xianxia's condition, he seemed to have understood something. He could not help but laugh and say in a deep voice, "Brat, I admit that your speed is very fast, but in the end, your strength is still too weak." As soon as he finished speaking, the middle-aged man did not give Xianxia any time to catch his breath and once again swung his 2-meter-long glaive at Xianxia. Because of the light wind sword and the middle-aged man's glaive, Xianxia had suffered some minor injuries. Although these injuries would not have been much of a hindrance to Xianxia under normal circumstances, in this battle against a middle-aged man who was 2 levels higher than him and had already reached the intermediate Saint Master level, these injuries were extremely fatal. After all, Xianxia could only rely on his profound movement skills to contend with the middle-aged man when he was in his peak condition. Now that he was injured, Xianxia could not maintain his speed and was gradually becoming more and more difficult to dodge. After exchanging a few blows with Xianxia, the middle-aged man seemed to have understood that Xianxia's threat to him had decreased by a lot. Thus, he decided to lower his guard against Xianxia and bring out all of his strength. He did not hold back at all as he attacked Xianxia with a speed that was several times faster than before. As the middle-aged man's attack speed increased, it became more and more difficult for Xianxia to dodge. If Xianxia was in his peak condition, not only would he be able to dodge the middle-aged man's attacks, he would also be able to find the time to counterattack. However, as the middle-aged man's speed increased, every time Xianxia tried to dodge the middle-aged man's attacks, it would become more and more dangerous. The middle-aged man's attack speed was extremely fast. In just a few breaths of time, he had already launched a few dozen attacks. Now that Xianxia had lost the ability to counterattack, his clothes were already filled with cracks. Traces of blood dyed the edges of the cracks red. From the small traces of blood, it could be seen that the wounds on Xianxia's body were not deep. A light cyan light flashed in the dark night. The middle-aged man's glaive seemed to be wrapped in a gust of wind as it cut through the night sky at an extremely fast speed towards Xianxia. Although Xianxia had already tried his best to dodge the glaive, he was still unable to completely dodge it due to his greatly reduced speed. The glaive left a deep wound on Xianxia's chest that was so deep that his bones could be seen. The glaive went through his entire chest, and the blood gushed out and dyed Xianxia's clothes red in a moment. The middle-aged man smiled ferociously and did not stop at all. Taking advantage of the fact that Xianxia had not pulled away from him, he immediately took a step forward to close the distance between him and Xianxia. His right foot flashed with a light cyan light as he ruthlessly kicked Xianxia's chest with lightning speed. Bam! Xianxia's body was kicked far away by the middle-aged man like a cannonball. While his body was still in the air, a mouthful of blood spurted out from Xianxia's mouth. His body flew for more than 20 meters, knocking away several bandits along the way before he fell to the ground in a sorry state. Immediately after, another mouthful of blood spurted out from Xianxia's mouth. His face had already become deathly pale. With a flash of cyan light, the middle-aged man had already crossed over 20 meters and appeared before Xianxia. He sneered at him and said, "I'll give you one last chance. If you tell me how you can display a speed that's no slower than mine with your puny strength, I'll spare your life today. Otherwise die." The middle-aged man's eyes flickered with a scorching light. He was extremely tempted by how Xianxia could display a speed that was no slower than his with his puny strength. He desperately wanted to know how to use a secret technique like that. To him who cultivated wind-attributed saint force, speed was extremely important. Once he grasped the secret technique, the middle-aged man could not imagine just how fast he would be. However, he was certain that his strength would increase drastically. At that time, his status in the Boundless Bandits would increase drastically. The middle-aged man felt his blood boil as soon as he thought up to there. He was extremely excited, and even his face became rather excited. Xianxia wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and slowly stood up. He stared coldly at the excited middle-aged man. The man could not help but sneer, "I'm afraid you don't have the ability." Even though he was quite injured, Xianxia did not show any fear towards the middle-aged man who was more powerful than him. As he said that, Xianxia made some slight adjustments to his body. He was completely relaxed now, as if he was completely defenseless. His right hand that gripped his sword loosened slightly as well. He seemed completely defenseless right now, not like he was in the middle of a battle at all. Xianxia's words caused the middle-aged man's face to darken. He coldly snorted and said, "Brat, with your current strength, you don't have the qualifications to boast like that. Since you don't want to speak, then I'll have to make you suffer." As soon as he finished speaking, the middle-aged man waved his large glaive towards Xianxia's right shoulder. Facing the middle-aged man's glaive, Xianxia did not make any movements to dodge. Instead, he raised his sword and met the glaive head-on. Although the speed of the glaive was incomparably fast, it gave people a feeling that it was as light as a feather. It was completely different from the ferocious killing intent from before. When the light wind sword and the glaive collided, there wasn't a single sound. The two weapons made contact without a single sound. The seemingly soft light wind sword was like a maggot attached to a bone as it stuck tightly to the glaive. Using a very ingenious method, it caused the glaive to deviate from its original path of attack. It circled around in the air a few times, completely removing the terrifying force from the glaive. Then, it led the glaive to the side, causing the glaive to land on the ground next to it. The middle-aged man's face slightly changed as he looked at Xianxia with a bit of surprise. This was because just a moment ago, he had actually lost control of his glaive. If such a strange thing happened to an opponent who was stronger than him, then it wouldn't be a big deal. But this time, his opponent was much weaker than him. This was something that the middle-aged man could not accept. "What kind of battle skill is that?" the middle-aged man asked in surprise. "Tai Chi sword technique," Xianxia replied. He wasn't proficient in Tai Chi sword technique, but he had interacted with the experts of the Wudang sect many times in his previous life. This allowed him to gradually understand the principles behind Tai Chi sword technique. At this moment, his strength was not as good as the middle-aged man's and he was already at the end of his rope. Xianxia had no choice but to use the Tai Chi sword technique that he wasn't proficient in to defend himself. The Tai Chi sword technique was about using softness to overcome hardness, using stillness to overcome the strong, and it also contained the ability to move 1,000 kilograms with little effort. It was indeed extremely helpful to Xianxia's current predicament. However, the only flaw was that Xianxia only had a superficial understanding of the Tai Chi sword technique. He was not proficient in it. After all, he was skilled with the sword, but even so, it was enough for Xianxia to last a while against the middle-aged man. Hearing this, the middle-aged man frowned in thought. He then shook his head slightly and murmured, "Tai Chi sword technique? I've never heard of it." Afterwards, the middle-aged man looked at Xianxia again. His eyes flickered with an indescribable light as he chuckled coldly, "Kid, I never thought that you would know so many battle skills even though you're not strong. Looks like it would be a pity to kill you with a single glaive. I should capture you and bring you back. I'm sure this would be a great contribution." With that, the middle-aged man attacked again. The glaive in his hand was filled with powerful saint force as it attacked Xianxia. He had already made up his mind to capture Xianxia today no matter what. The middle-aged man did not pay much attention to the Tai Chi sword technique that could divert his attacks. What really interested him was Xianxia's secret technique of using speed. Afterwards, Jianshan barely managed to contend with the middle-aged man with the Tai Chi sword technique that he was not very familiar with. With the mysteries of the Tai Chi sword technique, Jianshan was able to nullify all of the middle-aged man's attacks. At the same time, the middle-aged man was unable to control his glaive due to the guidance of the Tai Chi sword technique. Before Jianshan's Tai Chi sword technique, the middle-aged man's great strength seemed to be non-existent. However, Jianshan was not as relaxed as he seemed on the surface. Although the Tai Chi sword technique allowed him to overcome hardness with gentleness, he needed to use his full strength to nullify the terrifying force of the glaive as he had just become a saint. As a result, Jianshan seemed to be relaxed when blocking the middle-aged man's attacks, but it was actually extremely difficult. However, Jianshan could only use the Tai Chi sword technique to temporarily protect himself. He could not fight back at all. He could only block without any chance of winning. If it were not for the fact that the middle-aged man had forced him into a corner, Jianshan would never have used the Tai Chi sword technique that he was not very familiar with. After clashing with Jianshan a few times, a sliver of anger gradually appeared on the middle-aged man's face. Not only would his attacks be nullified by someone who was much weaker than him in a wondrous manner, he would even lose control over his weapon. This was definitely a humiliation to the middle-aged man. "Bastard, I don't believe that I can't do anything to you today." The middle-aged man flew into a rage out of humiliation. He finally could not help but curse. As he cursed, his attacks became even more ferocious. Chapter 77. The middle-aged man's frenzied attacks also put a lot of pressure on Jianshan. After all, Jianshan had to use his full strength to block the middle-aged man's attacks. It could be said that every time Jianshan blocked the middle-aged man's attacks, he would use up a lot of his saint force. Jianshan's previous battle with the middle-aged man had already used up more than half of his saint force. Now that he was heavily injured, Jianshan could only hold on for a short while before he started to feel a little weak. Blocking the middle-aged man's attacks was becoming more and more difficult. Jianshan had just entered the saint realm, but he was able to contend with the middle-aged man for so long. This wasn't just because of his high level of swordsmanship, but also because of his battle experience. If it was another person with the same level of strength as Jianshan, it would be hard to say if they would be able to survive after 10 exchanges with the middle-aged man. After all, the difference in strength between a saint and a saint master was just too great. In between, there was a gap of 2 whole stages. The light green light once again streaked across the sky. When the light wind sword in Jianshan's hand came into contact with the large glaive, it was no longer possible for him to block it. The light wind sword was blocked by the large glaive, and under the pressure of the large glaive, the light wind sword was no longer under Jianshan's control. In the end, the light wind sword ruthlessly smashed into Jianshan's chest. Jianshan's body was directly sent flying, and after flying for more than 10 meters, he finally landed on the ground. A mouthful of blood uncontrollably rushed up from his throat and sprayed out from his mouth, filling the air with a bloody mist. "Brat, let's see if you still have the ability to escape from my grasp. Obediently return with me." The middle-aged man coldly laughed. Without giving Jianshan any time to catch his breath, his figure flickered, and in the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Jianshan. He extended his large hands towards Jianshan's neck. Coldly looking at the middle-aged man's rapidly approaching hands, Jianshan's eyes flashed with a sharp light. However, he sighed inwardly, "AI, looks like I can only use my last move." The last move was Jianshan's ultimate life-saving move. At the same time, it was also his only life-saving move in the Tianyuan continent, sword manipulation. Sword manipulation was a technique that Jianshan had only comprehended after his battle with Dugu Qiubai in his previous life. He had broken through right before his death. However, just when Jianshan was about to use his ultimate move to deal with the predicament before him, a huge, fiery red sword suddenly swept through the air. It directly slashed towards the middle-aged man's hand that was reaching towards Jianshan. Glancing at the huge, fiery red sword from the corner of his eye, a sliver of disdain appeared in the middle-aged man's eyes. He gently snorted and his hand that was reaching towards Jianshan immediately stopped. Afterward, a faint, azure light erupted from his hand, directly enveloping the middle-aged man's hand. Afterward, the middle-aged man's hand that was enveloped by azure wind-attributed Saint Force directly swung towards the incoming sword. In the end, he caught the sword firmly in his hand. Using this opportunity, Xianxia forcefully endured his heavy injuries and crawled up from the ground. He instinctively looked at the person who had saved him. Just when he was about to thank him, his eyes suddenly narrowed. The owner of the sword was a young man who seemed to be in his 20s. The young man's appearance was ordinary, the type that would stand out in a crowd. However, Xianxia was familiar with this young man. He was the mercenary that he had gotten along very well with along the way, Mu Yun. The middle-aged man sneered as he looked at Mu Yun, who held the sword. He sneered, "You overestimate yourself." A strange smile appeared on Mu Yun's face when he heard the middle-aged man's words. He gently chuckled, "You're only a mid-saint master. You're not much stronger than me, yet you dare to boast like that." As soon as he finished speaking, Mu Yun's huge, fiery red sword shone brightly. The fiery red light emitted a scorching heat. It was extremely obvious in the pitch-black night, dispersing quite a bit of the surrounding darkness. As the fiery red light grew brighter and brighter, the temperature continued to rise. In just a few breaths of time, the huge, fiery red sword was wrapped in a dazzling, fiery red light. The light constantly pulsed, making it look like a sea of flames. The middle-aged man could not help but frown when he sensed the rapidly increasing temperature and the surging Saint Force on the sword. He then suddenly released the sword in his hand and viciously slapped the sword. Bang! Struck by the middle-aged man's powerful palm strike, Mu Yun's fiery greatsword was slapped to the side. However, Mu Yun had a certain amount of combat experience. Borrowing the strength of the greatsword, he actually turned around and made a circle in the air with the greatsword before slashing at the middle-aged man again. "Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish." The middle-aged man snorted coldly. The large glaive in his hand flashed with a light green light. Then he waved the glaive. Under the cover of a breeze, the glaive met the fiery red greatsword at an extremely fast speed. Clang! Mu Yun's sword and the glaive collided, producing a loud clang. The two saint weapons separated as soon as they came into contact. Mu Yun staggered back more than 10 steps. On the other hand, the middle-aged man's feet seemed to have taken root in the ground. He stood there as steady as a mountain, not even swaying in the slightest. It was obvious who was stronger and who was weaker with a single glance. Xianxia, who was standing on the side, saw this scene and understood. Mu Yun's strength was slightly weaker than the middle-aged man, but he was definitely stronger than him. According to his estimation, Mu Yun's strength should be between the intermediate and advanced great saint. Even so, he was still not a match for the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's wind-attributed Saint Force specialized in speed. In terms of attack power, it was far inferior to Mu Yun's fire-attributed Saint Force. After all, the fire-attributed Saint Force was recognized as the most powerful attack power apart from the two rarer attributes of light and darkness. However, the middle-aged man could completely suppress Mu Yun in a head-on battle with his wind-attributed Saint Force. If the middle-aged man used his wind-attributed Saint Force to fight Mu Yun with his speed, Xianxia was certain that Mu Yun would not be able to last long in the middle-aged man's hands. If he and Mu Yun worked together to fight the middle-aged man, Xianxia was confident that the two of them would be able to hold the middle-aged man back. Unfortunately, Xianxia had been heavily injured by the middle-aged man several times. He was now heavily injured. His organs had all been severely damaged. In his current state, even standing there was an extremely difficult task for him, let alone helping out. Forcing Mu Yun to retreat with one strike, the middle-aged man's eyes flashed with murderous intent. Without giving Mu Yun time to adjust, the green light on his glaive soared. His body left behind an illusory shadow as he appeared in front of Mu Yun in the blink of an eye. He slashed at Mu Yun's head with his glaive at an extremely fast speed. The middle-aged man did not hold back at all against Mu Yun. He directly tried to kill him as soon as he arrived. After all, there was nothing on Mu Yun that could interest him. Mu Yun's expression turned solemn. He suddenly let out a roar and the greatsword in his hand instantly turned red. An even hotter temperature radiated from the greatsword. At the same time, a raging flame suddenly appeared and enveloped the greatsword completely. Mu Yun then swung the greatsword to meet the oncoming glaive head-on. Just as Mu Yun's giant sword was swung out, it suddenly split into 3 fire snakes. 2 of them carried monstrous flames to meet the glaive, while the last fire snake rushed towards the middle-aged man's face. Boom! The glaive and the 2 fire snakes collided, and suddenly a loud sound rang out. The 2 fire snakes that were burning with monstrous flames were directly split apart by the glaive, causing sparks to fly in all directions. From afar, it looked like a beautiful flower that was blooming. It was a different kind of scenery. After dispersing the 2 fire snakes, the middle-aged man's glaive attack was also forcibly blocked. The 3rd fire snake was still like a ferocious tiger, bringing along scorching heat and raging flames as it went straight for the middle-aged man's face. Just as the 3rd snake of fire approached the middle-aged man's face, the middle-aged man suddenly released his glaive. Powerful wind-attributed Saint force gathered in a single moment before he slammed his hand toward the snake of fire. When the hand collided with the snake of fire, there was a loud boom. The snake of fire was dispersed by the middle-aged man's hand, causing sparks to fly in all directions again, dispersing the darkness in the surroundings. After dispersing the snake of fire, the middle-aged man did not continue his attack. He stared at Mu Yun in surprise and cried out, "That's a battle skill. You actually know a battle skill." No one noticed that the middle-aged man's drooping right hand had become incomparably red at this moment. Moreover, in terms of size, it was also a size larger than before. Xianxia also glanced at Mu Yun in surprise when he heard the middle-aged man's words. Xianxia was no stranger to battle skills. Instead, he knew extremely well that battle skills were an extremely precious cultivation method on the Tianyuan continent. Battle skills could be used to unleash attacks that were several times or even over 10 times more powerful than cultivation methods. They were far more precious than cultivation methods, so they were not something a normal mercenary could possess. Xianxia had never thought that Mu Yun, who seemed like a normal mercenary, would actually possess something as precious as a battle skill. It had to be mentioned that battle skills were so rare and expensive on the Tianyuan continent that even great saint masters could not possess them. Chapter 78. Mu Yun sneered, "You're quite knowledgeable." "That's right, it's a battle skill." The middle-aged man sucked in a deep breath as a sliver of greed immediately appeared in his gaze towards Mu Yun. Battle skills were extremely valuable on the Tianyuan continent. It was extremely difficult for regular fighters to obtain a battle skill unless they were the descendants of large clans that had been passed down for several decades or even several centuries or the renowned experts of the continent. Although there were a few people who managed to obtain a battle skill through pure luck, it was extremely rare for something like that to happen on the Tianyuan continent. Without great fortune and great luck, it was basically impossible for them to obtain a battle skill. Although the middle-aged man was already a mid-saint master and could be regarded as quite a powerful expert among the bandits, he still had not grasped a single battle skill. He had been drooling over battle skills for a very long time now, but unfortunately he did not have the right to obtain one with his strength and status. The middle-aged man slightly moved his right hand and felt the burning pain from it. He could not help but feel no anger inside. Instead, he became excited. With his knowledge, he could tell with a single glance that Mu Yun's battle skill was quite powerful. Even though the battle skill was of the fire attribute, it was not necessarily suitable for wind-attributed saint force. He had used it, but this did not stop the middle-aged man from being eager to obtain the battle skill. This was because battle skills were just too valuable on the Tianyuan continent. The more powerful a battle skill was, the more expensive it would be. Haha. It looks like even the heavens are looking out for me today. Kid, I'll be taking everything from you. The middle-aged man laughed out loud. The middle-aged man laughed aloud. His voice was filled with indescribable excitement. It was as if Xianxia's secret technique and Mu Yun's battle skill were already in his grasp. How arrogant! You overestimate yourself. Mu Yun sneered and struck out first. The huge, fiery red sword in his hand pierced through the pitch-black night sky with roaring flames, stabbing toward the middle-aged man's chest. As the sword swung over, a faint, vague pressure radiated from the sword, filling the surroundings. However, the pressure was extremely faint, so faint that it was almost undetectable. However, to Xianxia, who was already extremely powerful as a god, the faint pressure was still clearly sensed by him. When he sensed the source of the pressure, the surprise in his eyes became even heavier. The middle-aged man sneered as he watched the sword approach him with a powerful presence. He said, "Kid, you may be skilled in battle skills, but you're still a little too weak." As soon as his voice fell, just as the fiery red greatsword was about to touch the clothes on the middle-aged man's chest, the middle-aged man's figure suddenly disappeared like a ghost, causing Mu Yun's greatsword to miss. Seeing the middle-aged man disappear before his eyes, Mu Yun's face sank slightly. However, at this moment, an ear-piercing shriek came from behind. Without thinking, Mu Yun's huge sword immediately turned into 3 fire serpents and swung backward. In midair, the 3 fire serpents strangely fused into one, forming a fire serpent that was twice as large as the first one. Clang! With the sound of metal clashing, a large amount of sparks flew out from where the 2 of them clashed, directly submerging their bodies. Afterwards, a ring of fiery red ripples spread out from where the 2 of them clashed, rapidly expanding to a radius of over 10 meters. When the fiery red ripples swept past Xianxia's body, the heat that still hadn't dissipated from the flames burned Xianxia's coarse clothes black. If it weren't for the fact that Xianxia's clothes were covered in blood, keeping them slightly moist, his clothes would probably have been set ablaze already. Mu Yun and the middle-aged man retreated from the flames in a rather messy manner. The 2 of them seemed to be in a rather horrible shape. Mu Yun's neatly tied hair had become extremely messy while his face was pale. The fire-red sword in his right hand had become dim as well. On the other hand, the middle-aged man was wrapped in powerful wind-attributed saint force. Quite a few places on his clean clothes had become black spots from the flames. Only half of his sleeves remained. Due to the use of battle skills, the disturbance created by Mu Yun and the middle-aged man's battle was much greater than Xianxia's. The large swathe of sparks immediately attracted quite a few mercenaries. Immediately, the mercenaries and bandits who were still fighting glanced in the direction of the battle. When they saw the large swathe of sparks, a few of the more knowledgeable mercenaries could not help but cry out. Those are actually tangible flames. It's impossible to create tangible flames without reaching Earth's Saint Master. That's a battle skill. A battle skill. It's actually a battle skill. There's actually someone who knows a battle skill. Whether it was the mercenaries or the bandits, all of them cried out when they recognized Mu Yun's battle skill. Their gazes were filled with shock and disbelief. After all, battle skills were just far too rare and expensive on the Tianyuan continent. A few weaker mercenaries would probably never be able to see a battle skill in action in their entire lives. After their surprise, greed flickered in the eyes of most of the mercenaries and bandits. On the Tianyuan continent, battle skills were the things that every fighter coveted and desired the most. Their desire for battle skills far exceeded the desire for cultivation techniques. This was because battle skills could allow one to unleash attacks that were several times, or even 10 times more powerful than one's own strength. On the Tianyuan continent, where strength was everything and where slaughter was everywhere, possessing a battle skill would give one an additional layer of protection. Xianxia could not help but frown when he saw the greed in the eyes of the mercenaries and bandits. A man's wealth was his own ruin. He understood this principle better than anyone else. Mu Yun possessing a battle skill had completely exceeded his expectations. Now that Mu Yun's battle skill had been exposed before so many mercenaries, it would definitely bring him endless trouble with how precious battle skills were on the Tianyuan continent. It was even possible for him to lose his life because of it. After all, Mu Yun was still far too weak right now. Xianxia could not help but worry for Mu Yun's future. Although he had not known Mu Yun for very long and could only be regarded as strangers who had met by chance, Xianxia understood that Mu Yun had become embroiled in the battle with the middle-aged man in order to save him, thus exposing his battle skill. The middle-aged man stared at Mu Yun with a burning gaze and said with a deep voice, "What a powerful battle skill. You can actually block my full-powered strike as a great saint." When he spoke up to hear, the middle-aged man's voice paused for a moment. Then, the corners of his lips revealed a hint of a sneer, saying, "Even though you can temporarily display the power of a sacred expert through combat skills, this isn't your own strength in the end. I want to see how long you can last." With that, the middle-aged man raised his glaive high into the air. Just when he was about to attack Mu Yun again, several powerful presences suddenly appeared in the distance. The middle-aged man beamed with joy when he sensed the powerful presences that had suddenly appeared. In his opinion, the experts on his side had already killed the experts of the mercenary group and had come to reinforce them. At the end of the darkness in the distance, several black figures were running towards them at an extremely fast speed. In just a breath's time, the faces of the black figures appeared in everyone's line of sight. When they saw the faces of those figures, all the mercenaries immediately cheered loudly. "It's the captain! The captain and the others have returned. Captain Lang Tian! Captain Lang Tian has returned victorious. It's Captain Xiao." They killed the experts of the Boundless Bandits. There were a total of 5 people who had returned. Every one of them had wounds of various sizes on their bodies. With the help of the flickering flames not far away, one could vaguely see that their clothes were stained with blood. There were also several corpses on their shoulders. The middle-aged man and the bandits who were still fighting with the mercenaries immediately turned grim when they heard the thunderous cheers of the mercenaries. Then, the middle-aged man suddenly turned his head and stared at Captain Xiao and the others who had returned. His eyes were filled with disbelief. You, how did you all come back alive?" The middle-aged man swallowed his saliva with difficulty and said in disbelief. When he saw this scene, the middle-aged man knew that the experts in his camp had most likely met with misfortune. Otherwise, the ones who returned would not be the mercenaries, but the experts in his camp. The middle-aged man's words attracted the attention of the 5 mercenaries who had returned. Then, the 5 of them slowly put down the corpses on their shoulders and looked at the middle-aged man with murderous eyes. Sensing the strong murderous intent from the 5 of them, the middle-aged man was shocked. Without hesitation, he immediately shouted, "The situation is not good. Everyone retreat." Before he could finish speaking, the middle-aged man put away his glaive and retreated as fast as he could in a flash of light green light. Although the 5 experts who had returned were quite injured, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Moreover, there were 5 of them. The middle-aged man had no confidence in winning against them. As soon as the middle-aged man moved, 2 of the 5 experts who had just returned immediately chased after him. Hearing the middle-aged man's words, the bandits who were still struggling to hold on immediately abandoned their opponents and fled in all directions as if they had been granted amnesty. "Kill. Leave no one alive." As one of them ordered, the remaining mercenaries immediately strode forward and chased after the remaining members of the Boundless Bandits with all their might. These mercenaries hated the Boundless Bandits to the core. How could they let them leave so easily? Not only had the experts in their camp been defeated by the mercenaries, but even the middle-aged man, who was the only one who could speak, had fled. At this moment, the members of the Boundless Bandit group had lost their will to fight. They only cared about escaping, and they didn't even have the courage to fight anymore. On the other hand, the mercenaries' morale had soared after seeing their leaders and experts defeat the experts of the Boundless Bandit group. Even those who were originally exhausted suddenly had an inexhaustible supply of energy as they pursued the fleeing bandits with all their might. Shouts and screams filled the night, but they soon quieted down. Under the leadership of the 3 experts, more than half of the remaining bandits were killed by the mercenaries. Only a few of them managed to escape. "We won! We won! We defeated the Boundless Bandits! We defeated the Boundless Bandits!" Chapter 79. At this moment, 2 black figures quickly ran over from afar. Very soon, they stopped in front of a group of mercenaries. The 2 of them were the mercenaries who had chased after the middle-aged man. The two of them were middle-aged men in their 30s or 40s. Their faces were covered in blood, and their bodies were covered in wounds. Their tattered clothes had been dyed red with blood, and their resolute faces were pale. However, their bright eyes were still brimming with energy. Seeing how the two of them returned empty-handed, it was obvious that they had failed to catch up to the middle-aged man. Sigh, that person possesses wind-attributed Saint Force, so he has a huge advantage in terms of speed. Even though we're stronger than him, we can't catch up to him at all in our current state. He managed to escape in the end, one of them said helplessly. Whatever, let him escape. I never thought that he would actually be from the Boundless Bandits. No wonder he's so powerful. If it weren't for the help of a mysterious expert, we probably wouldn't have been able to make it back alive. It's already extremely fortunate that we managed to keep our lives this time, said a burly middle-aged man. The one who spoke was a tall and sturdy middle-aged man. Under the illumination of the fire, one could vaguely see that the skin on his face was rather tanned. Upon hearing the middle-aged man's words, the expressions of the other mercenaries who had gone to kill the Boundless Bandits changed slightly. There was actually a hint of relief and lingering fear in their eyes. Captain Lang Tian, are you all right? At this moment, a mercenary arrived before the middle-aged man and asked in concern. The middle-aged man called Captain Lang Tian lowered his head slightly when he heard that. He looked at his wounds and shook his head gently. I'm fine. I can still hold on. With that, the middle-aged man glanced at the mercenaries on his shoulders. He let out a long sigh as sorrow flashed through his eyes. He said with a heavy voice, It's a pity that Mu Yunbai, Dehe, and the captain of the desert mercenaries have all died to the hands of the Boundless Bandits. Many of the mercenaries became filled with sorrow when they heard that, especially the members of the desert mercenaries. Their hearts were extremely heavy. However, to the mercenaries who often roamed the Tianyuan continent and lived on the edge of the blade, who knew how many times they had experienced something like this, they had already become accustomed to it, so they calmed down very quickly. Brothers, although we have successfully forced the Boundless Bandit group to retreat, we have only encountered a small group of them this time. If we were to encounter their large group or elite group, we would definitely have no chance of survival. Therefore, it is not wise to stay here for long. Everyone, immediately count the casualties and bury the brothers who have died in battle. After that, we will hurry through the night and leave this place immediately, Commander Lang Tian said loudly. Hearing this, the mercenaries immediately became busy. Among them, the mercenaries who were more heavily injured were escorted away to be treated with medicine. As for those who were strong and not heavily injured, they were all arranged to dig holes and move the corpses. Everyone busied themselves silently. A strange silence filled the entire campsite. At that moment, no one said anything. They all silently went about their own business. The atmosphere was extremely heavy. Xianxia glanced around and sighed inside. Although they had achieved the final victory against the Boundless Bandits, it had been a Pyrrhic victory. After the battle, the combined strength of the three mercenary groups had been drastically reduced. Their numbers had been reduced from several hundred to less than 100. They were less than a third of their original strength. Only 5 of the dozen or so experts who had charged out had returned, and all of them were injured. Their battle prowess had plummeted. Even the captain of one of the mercenary groups had died in the battle against the Boundless Bandits. Xianxia, are you all right? Are your wounds heavy? At this moment, a rather familiar voice rang out in Xianxia's head. When Xianxia heard that, he turned around and saw that Mu Yun had appeared behind him at some point in time. The person who had spoken was Mu Yun. Mu Yun's current condition was not very good. His face was sickly pale. His previous confrontation with the middle-aged man had not been as easy as it seemed on the surface. Although his combat skills had allowed him to unleash his strength, with his current strength, using combat skills would put a huge burden on his body. Xianxia shook his head gently and said, I'm fine. Xianxia paused and looked at Mu Yun with a complicated gaze. He said softly, Mu Yun, your combat skills have been discovered by many mercenaries. You should be careful along the way. Once you reach a safe place, leave this caravan as soon as possible. Otherwise, I'm afraid that some of them will do something to harm you. With Jianshan's words, Mu Yun glanced at the mercenaries who were busy in the surroundings and chuckled. Jianshan, thank you for your kind reminder. I will be careful. Although he said that, Mu Yun didn't seem worried at all. It was as if he didn't care about these mercenaries at all. Jianshan's heart skipped a beat as he stared at Mu Yun's calm face. He seemed to be in thought. Jianshan did not believe that Mu Yun was strong enough to protect himself in the mercenary group with the strength he had displayed against the middle-aged man. After all, Mu Yun took out a white porcelain bottle from his space ring and passed it to Jianshan. He said, "This is good medicine for healing. Take it orally and use it externally. Take it and treat your injuries." "Thank you." Jianshan did not refuse. He directly extended his hand and accepted the bottle from Mu Yun. "You're welcome. Go treat your injuries first. I'll go do some things for them as well." With that, Mu Yun left. 2 hours later, the entire caravan was cleaned up. The mercenaries who had died in the battle were all buried in a large pit. Not a single person from the Boundless Bandits paid any attention to them. Their corpses were still strewn across the ground. The mercenaries hated the Boundless Bandits so much that no one would bother to collect their corpses. During the 2 hours, Jianshan had roughly treated his injuries. He had also changed out of his clothes that had become tattered from the battle with the middle-aged man. Before they set off, Jianshan had prepared over a dozen sets of clothes in his space ring, so he did not have to worry about not being able to find a change of clothes. Set off. Once everything was ready, the entire caravan set off again under the orders of one of the leaders. They were prepared to travel through the night without any rest. After the attack by the Boundless Bandits, the caravan no longer dared to stay in the area, not even for a moment longer. After the battle with the Boundless Bandits, the caravan's defenses had been drastically weakened. They no longer had the strength to deal with the upcoming battle. After all, quite a few of the bandits had managed to escape. If the caravan did not leave, they would be surrounded by a large group of bandits before long. At that time, they would really be powerless to turn the situation around. Jianshan climbed onto his mount with great difficulty and followed the caravan through the night. Jianshan closed his eyes as he silently circulated his saint force to heal his wounds. After being struck by the middle-aged man a few times, Jianshan was quite heavily injured. At the same time, he had consumed far too much saint force. Even the most basic movements were rather difficult for him right now, let alone battle. On the Tianyuan continent, where danger could come at any time, strength was the most important thing. As a result, Jianshan did not dare to rest for even a single moment. He worked hard to recover his strength. The caravan moved forward quickly on the official road. As everyone was worried that the Boundless Bandits' reinforcements would catch up with them, they moved several times faster than before. Even so, they were only a little faster than an ordinary person running at full speed. After all, there were carts full of goods, so it was impossible to speed up even if they wanted to. Even at their current speed, they almost overturned their carts several times when they passed through some bumpy roads. Jianshan's eyes remained closed as he circulated his saint force to slowly heal his wounds. Due to the environment, Jianshan did not dare to focus on healing at all. As a result, his extremely heavy wounds healed at a snail's pace. Jianshan could not help but think of his mother, Bai Yuntian. He could still clearly remember how he had injured his third brother, Changyangku, a few years ago in Changyang Prefecture. Bai Yuntian had healed Changyangku effortlessly without even leaving behind a single scar. If a Radiant Saint Master was present right now, it would probably be much easier for him to heal. Unfortunately, there were just far too few Radiant Saint Masters, and they possessed extremely great statuses. It was impossible for the 3 mercenary groups to invite them over with their current strength. Just as Jianshan thought of a Radiant Saint Master, a thought suddenly flashed through his head. He suddenly opened his eyes, and the moment he opened them, a resplendent light shot out from his eyes. Oh right, I can sense Radiant Saint Force and absorb it. I wonder if I can control Radiant Saint Force to heal myself like a Radiant Saint Master, Jianshan thought to himself. As soon as he thought about how it was very likely that he could control Radiant Saint Force like a Radiant Saint Master, his heart immediately surged with excitement. He was unable to control his joy. Chapter 80. Xianxia sucked in a deep breath and slowly suppressed his excitement. He slowly calmed himself down. Once he calmed down, he immediately closed his eyes again without any hesitation and absorbed the energy of the world like he usually did. However, unlike before, Xianxia did not absorb the energy of the world to cultivate. Instead, he extracted the special energy from the surroundings and directly absorbed it into his body. All of this sounded simple, but it was extremely difficult to actually do. However, to Xianxia, who had an extremely powerful god, doing this was not particularly difficult. At most, he would just have to expend a little more effort. Before Xianxia's powerful god, the energy of the world could not be sensed by anyone other than radiant saint masters. It immediately appeared in Xianxia's senses. Afterwards, Xianxia's powerful god was like a vacuum cleaner with great suction, wildly extracting the energy of the world. Afterwards, it slowly gathered in his body and was absorbed by him in the end. Xianxia knew extremely well that when the special energy gathered to a certain extent, it would shine with a milky white light. As a result, in order to prevent this from happening to him, Xianxia absorbed the energy at an extremely slow speed. It was as slow as a snail. When the special energy was absorbed by Xianxia, it immediately fused with his limbs. At the same time, a comfortable feeling appeared from the bottom of Xianxia's heart, filling his entire body very quickly. Xianxia only felt that his entire body was enveloped by a ball of warmth. It was extremely comfortable. As he bathed in this comfortable feeling, Xianxia seemed to enjoy it very much. Xianxia's heavily injured body began to recover at an extremely terrifying rate after fusing with the special energy. It was so fast that it left Xianxia dumbfounded. He felt disbelief. Only now did he truly experience just how terrifying the Radiant Saint force controlled by Radiant Saint Masters was in terms of healing. The books said that a few high-level Radiant Saint Masters could not only regrow a person's arm, they could even bring the dead back to life. It looks like these words are not false at all. Judging from the healing effects of this Radiant Saint force, perhaps a few peak high-level Radiant Saint Masters really do have such heaven-defying abilities. Xianxia thought to himself. If it was said that he held a skeptical attitude towards high-level Radiant Saint Masters being able to regrow a person's arm and bring the dead back to life, then after tasting the healing effects of the Radiant Saint force, he was 80% convinced. Sitting on the back of the horse, Xianxia used his soul to extract the Radiant Saint force from the energy of the world. Afterwards, he absorbed it at a slow and steady rate. Because his body was absorbing the Radiant Saint force, Xianxia's body was enveloped by a faint layer of strange energy. This strange energy was the special energy known as Radiant Saint force. Although there were several mercenaries gathered not too far away from Xianxia, and there were even a few great Saint Masters, they did not notice the abnormality of Xianxia's body at all. Radiant Saint force was an extremely special energy. Aside from Radiant Saint Masters, other fighters were unable to sense its existence at all. Even a few peak Heaven Saint Masters were unable to sense Radiant Saint force in the surroundings. It was exactly because of this that there were so few Radiant Saint Masters on the Tianyuan continent. Every single Radiant Saint Master on the Tianyuan continent was born with a Radiant Saint force. From the moment they were born, their souls had formed a faint connection with the Radiant Saint force in the surroundings. As a result, they could sense the existence of Radiant Saint force in the surroundings. As their soul grew, they would gradually gain control over the energy. When the Radiant Saint force gathered to a certain extent, it would form a milky white light. Only in this way could warriors discover the existence of the Radiant Saint force with their eyes. They could not sense the Radiant Saint force like they could sense the Yuan Qi of the world. In their perception, the Radiant Saint force was a complete blank. A night passed quickly as the caravan hurried along. Not a single person in the caravan slept the entire night. They were either using the time to heal their wounds or paying close attention to the surroundings at all times. All of them were afraid of running into the boundless bandits again. In the tense atmosphere of the mercenaries, the night finally passed. Even so, none of them let down their guard. Although they were far away from their previous stop after a night of rushing, they still hadn't reached a safe place. In this area, they could still encounter bandits and robbers at any time. If this group of mercenaries were in peak condition, they would naturally not be afraid of ordinary bandits. Unfortunately, after the battle with the boundless bandits, not only were all of them injured, but their numbers were also greatly reduced. With their current strength, even if they encountered ordinary bandits, it would probably be a tough battle. Although they could save their lives by discarding some of their goods that could be sent overseas were not cheap. Unless they had no other choice, neither the merchants nor the mercenaries were willing to make such a choice. When the fiery red sun slowly rose from the horizon, Xianxia, who had been sitting on his horse without moving for the entire night, finally opened his eyes slowly. His eyes were filled with joy and excitement. After a night of treatment, Xianxia's severe injuries that would have taken at least 5 or 6 days to heal had completely healed. Even the saint force in his body that had been depleted had reached a state of saturation. It could be said that Xianxia had reached his peak condition. Furthermore, Xianxia could clearly sense that the saint force in his body had increased by a lot compared to the day before. I never thought that I could actually control Radiant Saint Force like a Radiant Saint Master. Xianxia thought to himself as ecstasy filled his heart. To him, this was definitely a delightful discovery. With such an ability, his life in the future would have an additional layer of protection. No matter how severe his injuries were, he would be able to recover as quickly as possible at any time. While he was pleasantly surprised, Xianxia was also shocked by the effects of Radiant Saint Force on his injuries. If his injuries were treated with medicine, it would have taken him 4 or 5 days to completely recover, but with Radiant Saint Force, he had completely recovered in a single night. Furthermore, Xianxia had purposefully slowed down the rate at which he absorbed Radiant Saint Force. After all, he did not want to reveal his ability to control Radiant Saint Force by gathering Radiant Saint Force too quickly. Xianxia was extremely clear that the fact that he could control Radiant Saint Force like a Radiant Saint Master was not something that could be easily leaked unless it was absolutely necessary. He had considered everything very thoroughly. Perhaps at a critical moment, his ability to control Radiant Saint Force would have an unexpected effect. Although the status of a Radiant Saint Master was extremely high in the Tianyuan continent, but compared to his own life, this honor was nothing. Afterwards, the caravan's journey was quite peaceful. Aside from the occasional harassment from 1 or 2 weak magical beasts, they did not encounter any attacks from bandits or powerful magical beasts. Just like this, the caravan hurried for a few days. The journey that would have taken 10 days was shortened to 6 days. After 3 days of continuous travel, the caravan finally made it through the most dangerous part of the journey and arrived at the border fortress of the Blue Wind Kingdom. Looking at the faintly discernible tall city walls in the distance, all of the mercenaries had a happy smile on their face. Until this moment, they felt relieved. Although there was still a long way to go, and the road was not necessarily safe, but not far from the Blue Wind Kingdom, there was a small town. In this town, they could recruit some mercenaries to supplement their fighting strength. We have arrived at the Blue Wind Kingdom. We have finally arrived at the Blue Wind Kingdom. Now that we are all safe, we don't have to worry about the boundless bandits chasing us anymore. Many of the mercenaries couldn't help but cry out. Their voices were filled with excitement, and even Xianxia couldn't help but smile. At this moment, he felt a lot more relaxed. After all, his current strength was still too weak. Once he encountered bandits that even these mercenaries couldn't stop, he would be in for a tough time. Although they could see the tall walls in the distance, they were still nearly 10 miles away from the border fortress. Once they got closer to the border fortress, they could see several figures and caravans passing by from time to time. The distance of 10 miles was covered in a blink of an eye. When the caravan arrived at the border of the border fortress, they were stopped by a famous guard. "Stop right there. Where did you come from?" A soldier who seemed to be the leader of the group scanned the caravan with a sharp gaze and shouted. Naturally, someone from the caravan would take care of this matter. A mercenary immediately stepped forward and negotiated with the soldier who seemed to be the leader. At the same time, a few golden dots of light flashed in his hand, and he carefully stuffed them into the soldier's hand. The guard clenched his fist and carefully rubbed it a few times. Gradually, A satisfied smile appeared on his face. He waved his hand and said loudly, "You can go in." Soon after, the caravan successfully passed through the border fortress of the Blue Wind Kingdom and entered the territory of the Blue Wind Kingdom. After passing through the border fortress, Xianxia immediately felt a lot more at ease. This way, he had at least successfully escaped from the Huayan sect's sphere of influence. Although the Huayan sect's influence in the kingdom of Jessen was very large, Xianxia believed that their hands could not reach as far as the Blue Wind Kingdom. Not far from the border fortress of the Blue Wind Kingdom, there was a small city. After the caravan parked the caravan filled with goods, the mercenaries dispersed and went to rest, leaving only 2 people to look after the goods. The place where the goods were parked was specially arranged by the Chamber of Commerce. This was where all the goods of the caravan were stored. There were experts sent by the Chamber of Commerce to guard this place, ensuring the safety of these goods. Therefore, by parking the goods here, there was no need to worry about the possibility of theft. Chapter 81. After the goods were parked, it was free time for the mercenaries to move around. At the same time, it was also time for everyone to rest. However, because they had been traveling day and night without rest for the past few days, everyone was very tired. So when everyone was dismissed, they scattered. Most of them didn't even have time to eat and found a restaurant to sleep. Some of them who were injured also hurried to treat their injuries. Xianxia tied up his horse and glanced around. Finally, he stopped at the back of a person wearing simple clothes. Then he cautiously looked around and finally walked towards the back of the person. Xianxia came to the back of the person wearing simple clothes and said in a low voice, "Mu Yun, the fact that you have a combat skill has been known by many mercenaries. Now, you should take this opportunity to leave quickly. Otherwise, I'm afraid that they will do something unfavorable to you." Hearing Xianxia's words, Mu Yun looked back at Xianxia and said with a smile, "Don't worry, it's not that easy to get my combat skill." Hearing this, Xianxia frowned. Xiaochen frowned slightly and gave Mu Yun a deep look. He smiled faintly and said, "Since that is the case, I will not waste any more words." Speaking up to here, Xianxia paused for a moment and then continued, "Since we have successfully arrived at the Blue Wind Kingdom, then I will also leave the mercenary group. We won't be able to travel together for the rest of the journey. Brother Mu Yun, take care." Xianxia cupped his fist at Mu Yun. Although it was the first time that Xianxia and Mu Yun met, the two of them had a good relationship and could talk to each other. Moreover, in order to save Xianxia, Mu Yun exposed the fact that he had a combat skill. Therefore, in Xianxia's heart, Mu Yun had a good impression. However, this was not enough for Xianxia to include Mu Yun in his list of friends. "You also take care." Mu Yun also cupped his fist and replied, "Two friends, are you planning to leave? Everyone has worked hard along the way. We have already prepared good food and wine. Why don't we all have a good meal together?" At this moment, a deep voice suddenly came. A big man wearing black clothes walked towards Xianxia and Mu Yun with a smile on his face. Looking at this big man, Xianxia was slightly stunned, but he quickly recovered and immediately cupped his fist. "So it's leader Lang Tian." In the past few days, Xianxia had become much more familiar with the people of these 3 mercenary groups. As for the large man in black, he was precisely the leader of the mercenary group, Lang Tian. He was a great Saint Master expert. As soon as he saw leader Lang Tian, Mu Yun also put down what he was doing and cupped his fist towards leader Lang Tian with a smile, which could be considered as a greeting. "My 2 friends, may I know how to address you?" It's really our fault that we were attacked by the Boundless Bandits this time. Fortunately, we managed to repel the Boundless Bandits in the end. During this period of time, we have to thank the both of you for your help. Otherwise, I'm afraid our casualties would have been even greater. Leader Lang Tian had a gentle smile on his face, looking like a kind uncle. "I'm Xianxia." "Leader Lang Tian, you're too polite." This time, we were able to successfully repel the Boundless Bandits because leader Lang Tian led the team to kill the experts in the opposing camp. Xianxia had a faint smile on his face as he replied with a light chuckle. "Mu Yun, Brother Xianxia is right. This time, we were able to successfully repel the boundless bandits because leader Lang Tian killed the experts in the opposing camp. Otherwise, I'm afraid that even we wouldn't have a chance to survive. Mu Yun also said with a smile. After hearing Jianxin and Mu Yun's words, a look of shame flashed across leader Lang Tian's eyes, but he quickly concealed it. He then said, Jianxin, Mu Yun, these two friends are too polite. No matter what the final result is, I still want to thank you on behalf of the entire Lang Tian mercenary group. These days, everyone was worried that the boundless bandits would catch up to them, so we've been hurrying along day and night. It's really been hard on the two of you. Now that we've prepared good food and wine, why don't we all have a good meal and then have a good rest for a few days to ease the fatigue of these days? All right. These days, I've been eating rations all day. I've almost forgotten what meat tastes like. It just so happens that I'm planning to have a good meal later. Since leader Lang Tian has already prepared food and wine, I'll save on the cost of a meal. Mu Yun very straightforwardly agreed. He then looked at Jianxin and said, Brother Jianxin, why don't we go together? These days, you've been eating rations all day. I'm sure you're tired of it. Hearing this, Jianxin shook his head slightly and said, I appreciate leader Lang Tian's kindness, but I still have important matters to attend to, so I have to leave immediately. I won't be able to accompany you brothers to drink. If I've offended you in any way, I hope leader Lang Tian can forgive me. A trace of regret appeared on leader Lang Tian's face. However, since Jianxin had already said so, he couldn't continue to urge him to stay. He could only cup his hands and say, since brother Jianxin has important matters to attend to, then I won't delay brother Jianxin's time to avoid disturbing you. Afterwards, Jianxin directly left after bidding farewell to leader Lang Tian. For a mercenary like him who had joined the caravan midway, his freedom was not restricted in any way. Therefore, Jianxin could leave whenever he wanted. There was no need for him to report to anyone. Not long after Jianxin left, leader Lang Tian, who was dressed in black, gathered with several mercenaries in a room of a restaurant. They were discussing something in low voices. Kabo, are you sure that the mercenary called Mu Yun had a battle skill on him? The one who spoke was a middle-aged man wearing a white gown who was sitting beside leader Lang Tian. The middle-aged man had a medium build. His long black hair was tied behind his head with a string. On his bronze skin, there was an exceptionally sinister wound. From the blood scars that had yet to completely fall off, it was very obvious that this wound had been inflicted recently. Yes, leader by Feiyun. When that mercenary called Mu Yun used his battle skill, many people here saw it. It definitely wasn't fake. A mercenary immediately opened his mouth to reply. Yes, leader by Feiyun, leader Lang Tian. I believe that as long as our brothers who survived this matter, they can all testify to this matter. Mu Yun definitely used a battle skill, and it was a battle skill of quite a high grade. Someone immediately agreed. Originally, these mercenaries would have reported such an important matter long ago. Unfortunately, at that time, they could have encountered the boundless bandits' troops at any time. It was uncertain whether they would be able to keep their lives. Therefore, at that time, no one cared about the battle skill. After all, even if you obtained a battle skill, if you did not have the life to enjoy it, then in the end, it would all be for naught. But now, it was different. They had entered the Blue Wind Kingdom, which meant that they were temporarily safe. At this time, they finally spoke of the battle skill that Mu Yun possessed. Although they were a group of mercenaries, the living environment of the Tianyuan continent was extremely cruel. Even some mercenaries would act like bandits when they saw something that made them jealous. Things like this were not uncommon on the Tianyuan continent. Hearing the words of the two mercenaries, the other people in the room frowned at the same time. The middle-aged man in a white robe looked at leader Lang Tian, who was dressed in black, and said, "Leader Lang Tian, what do you think about this matter?" Leader Lang Tian frowned and thought for a while. Then he slowly opened his mouth and said, "I think Mu Yun himself should know that the matter of his battle skill has been leaked. But what I don't understand is, with his strength as a great saint, after knowing that the matter of his battle skill has been leaked, why didn't he choose to escape from here at the first moment? Instead, he continued to stay with us. Isn't he afraid that we will have designs on his battle skill? Taking a step back, even if he believes us, isn't he worried that the matter of his battle skill will be leaked from our mouths? It will cause him endless trouble and even cause him to lose his life. Leader Lang Tian analyzed. Although he looked more like a simple-minded burly man, he was not stupid at all. If that's the case, then this mercenary named Mu Yun is either an idiot with a screw loose in his head, or he has something to rely on that makes him so fearless. The middle-aged man in the white robe muttered to himself. Hearing this, Leader Lang Tian spoke again. I've been in contact with Mu Yun before. In my opinion, Mu Yun is not an idiot with a problem in his head. Moreover, he seems to be an experienced veteran mercenary. How could such a person make such a fatal mistake? Do any of you know the origin of this Mu Yun? The middle-aged man in a white robe continued to ask. This Mu Yun joined us midway and traveled with us. As for his background, we don't know. After all, some mercenaries who want to travel long distances will almost always join a caravan to ensure a smooth journey. For such a person, it's not good for us to get to the bottom of the matter. The one who spoke was a middle-aged man in a green robe. His face was slightly pale. If Xianxia were present, he would definitely recognize this middle-aged man with a single glance. He was the person who had agreed to let him travel with the caravan in the kingdom of Jessen. The mercenaries in the room fell silent. After a while, a mercenary finally could not help but ask, "Leader, are we going to do it or not? If we successfully obtain the battle skill, it'll be quite the fortune for us. Even if we don't use it, if we sell it, it'll definitely fetch an astronomical price with how precious battle skills are on the Tian Yuan continent. Moreover, this battle skill is of quite a high grade. Leader, why don't we take a gamble?" Another mercenary suggested as eagerness flickered in his eyes. Leader Lang Tian frowned, but he did not agree immediately. Instead, he looked at the middle-aged man in white robes beside him and asked, "Leader Bai Yunfei, may I ask if you have any ideas about this matter?" The middle-aged man who was referred to as Leader Bai Yunfei frowned. The light in his eyes flickered as he hesitated. After a long moment of thought, Bai Yunfei finally spoke. "Captain Lang Tian, I'm sure you remember when we were fighting with the Boundless Bandits a few days ago. In the end, there was a mysterious person who helped us from the shadows, right?" Bai Yunfei's voice was heavy with emotion. The expressions of the mercenaries in the room changed slightly when they heard what Leader Bai Yunfei had said. Apart from the 5 people who had returned, no one else knew about what had happened, so they naturally did not know. Originally, these mercenaries believed that the Boundless Bandits had been killed by their leader and a few other experts working together. However, it seemed that this was not the case at all. Chapter 82. Hearing Captain Lang Tian's words, the faces of the mercenaries in the room who were unaware of the situation changed greatly. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with shock and disbelief. Lang Tian continued, "Captain Bai Yunfei, I reckon you're also worried about that mysterious expert and Mu Yun having some sort of connection." Bai Yunfei nodded, saying, "If it weren't for the fact that Mu Yun still stayed here without any scruples after the matter of him possessing a battle skill was exposed, I wouldn't have associated him with that mysterious expert." "What you say makes a lot of sense." Lang Tian opened his mouth. "If Mu Yun really has some sort of connection with that mysterious expert, then we absolutely can't make a move. Otherwise, the consequences will be even more serious than if we ran into the Boundless Bandits. That mysterious expert can absolutely destroy our entire team with ease." Bai Yunfei's face was also solemn as he said in a deep voice, "Pass down the order. No one is to mention the matter of Mu Yun possessing a battle skill again. Everyone is to act as if they don't know anything about this matter at all." After bidding farewell to Mu Yun, Xianxia wandered around the city called Black Wind City. Black Wind City was a small city, but because it was close to the border stronghold of the Blue Wind Empire, the entire city was bustling with activity everywhere. The flow of people was also very large, and merchants and mercenaries from other countries could be seen everywhere. Arriving at a place not far from the mercenary union, Xianxia directly found a restaurant to stay in. These days of running around through the night had made him feel a burst of exhaustion. First, he casually ate a few things in the restaurant. After drinking and eating to his heart's content, Xianxia was led directly by the restaurant's waiter to his room. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, Xianxia didn't sleep. Instead, he took out several Class 1 monster cores from his space belt and began to cultivate. Right now, he didn't dare to slow down his increase in strength for even a moment. As long as he had the time, Xianxia would take out the monster cores to cultivate. This was because only when he was strong enough to not belong to the Huayan sect, or even strong enough to make the Huayan sect feel fear, would he be able to openly return home. Although he wouldn't necessarily be discovered by the Huayan sect if he were to sneak back, with the arrogance that came from Xianxia's bones, he clearly wouldn't be able to do such a thing. The energy within the monster cores was rapidly draining away at a terrifying speed. Then, it poured into Xianxia's body through his pores and was finally absorbed by him. However, of this enormous amount of energy, only 1% was truly absorbed by Xianxia. Of this, 99% was absorbed by the purple and green dots of light that had mysteriously appeared in his dantian. These two dots of light were like bottomless pits. No matter how much energy they absorbed, they wouldn't change in the slightest. As for the matter of his dantian, Xianxia was also helpless. This was simply not something he could control. Right now, he could only allow the two dots of light in his dantian to steal his energy. However, the one thing that made Xianxia feel rather comfortable was that although the consumption of monster cores was several hundred times greater than before, his cultivation speed was actually faster than before. This made Xianxia feel a bit of comfort in his heart. Early the next morning, when the warm and gentle sunlight shone on the ground, Xianxia also woke up from his cultivation state. Opening his eyes, Xianxia looked at the Class 1 monster cores in his hands that had completely disappeared. He couldn't help but bitterly smile as he sighed. This consumption is really too great. I've used up more than 50 Class 1 monster cores in a single night of cultivation. Although I still have some monster cores in my space ring, at this rate, I'm afraid I can only last for 10 days at most. Xianxia got off the bed and moved his legs slightly. Then, he went to the window and looked at the unceasing flow of people on the street outside. He muttered, "The matter of cultivation absolutely cannot be stopped. If I don't have monster cores, just by absorbing the yuan qi of heaven and earth, my cultivation speed will only be 1/10 of my usual speed. This is not desirable. It seems that I have to find a way to replenish my monster cores." Then, Xianxia left the room and went to the bottom floor of the restaurant. He casually found an empty table and sat down. "Sir, what would you like to eat?" Just as Xianxia sat down, the enthusiastic restaurant waiter greeted him with a face full of smiles. A plate of stir-fried tiger meat, 2 side dishes, and a bowl of white rice. Xianxia casually ordered a few side dishes. "Okay, sir, please wait a moment." Sitting at the table with a bit of boredom, Xianxia casually glanced around the restaurant. The size of this restaurant was not large, and could only be considered medium in Black Wind City. However, it was currently morning, and it was the time for merchants and mercenaries to eat. Therefore, there were already many people sitting in the restaurant. Originally, there were 30 to 40 tables, but now, there were less than 5. The restaurant was very noisy. Many mercenaries were talking loudly, not caring about the feelings of others. "Sir, your dishes are here." Xianxia did not have to wait for long. Soon, the restaurant waiter brought the dishes that Xianxia ordered and carefully placed them on the table. Xianxia ate breakfast while listening to the mercenaries chatting in the restaurant. Although the restaurant was very noisy, the people gathered here were all mercenaries who had traveled extensively. From their mouths, he could hear a lot of interesting and new things. At this moment, a few men dressed as mercenaries came in from the entrance of the restaurant. There were a total of 5 people. Except for 3 young men who looked to be in their 20s or 30s, the other 2 were middle-aged men in their 40s. They were all wearing cyan robes. It was not difficult to tell that they belonged to the same mercenary group by the silver badge hanging on their chests. Moreover, this mercenary group had a silver badge. The level of this mercenary group was not low. As soon as the 5 of them entered the restaurant, their eyes swept around. But now was the peak time for eating. The tables in the restaurant had long been occupied. There were no empty seats. What bad luck, there are no seats. A thin young man wearing a cyan robe cursed aloud. The young man standing next to him swept his eyes around the restaurant and finally stopped at Jianxin, who occupied a table. He smiled and said, "Gan Ho, who said there are no seats? You see, there is only one table. Although it is a bit crowded for us to sit at the same table, there is nothing we can do about it." Although there were still many people in the restaurant besides Jianxin who sat alone at a table, it was obvious that these people were not easy to deal with. Only Jianxin alone did not seem to be a threat. Therefore, the young man naturally targeted Jianxin. Hearing this, their eyes gathered on Jianxin, who was wearing a white robe. When they saw Jianxin, who looked to be in his 20s, a malicious smile appeared on their faces. Then, the 5 of them walked over at the same time. When they arrived at Jianxin's table, the young man called Gan Ho, patted Jianxin's shoulder and said with a fake smile, "Friend, we are taking this table now. You should find another one." Hearing that, Jianxin frowned. He raised his head slightly and glanced at the 5 of them. When his powerful soul sensed that the 5 of them were not very powerful, he immediately relaxed. He said, "Sorry, I also need to use this table right now." Jianxin did not fear the 5 of them at all. Although 2 of them were quite old, they were not very strong. After all, the strength of one's strength was not solely determined by age. Some people with outstanding talent could become top experts renowned throughout the continent at a young age, while some people with mediocre talent would never be able to condense a saint weapon and cross the threshold of the saint realm. Gan Ho's face immediately sank. He looked at Jianxin coldly and said in a deep voice, "Brat, don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. If you know what's good for you, piss off immediately." Chapter 83. Jianxin's expression changed slightly. His originally calm gaze turned sharp after hearing Gan Ho's words. Although his current strength was still too weak, this didn't mean that Jianxin was a coward. Jianxin slowly put down his chopsticks. His lips trembled slightly as he said in a low voice, "Just the few of you aren't qualified to occupy my table." Hearing this, Gan Ho was stunned at first, but then he sneered. He stared coldly at Jianxin. The intense killing intent in his eyes was undisguised. If Jianxin really didn't know how to appreciate his kindness, he wouldn't mind crippling him. In his opinion, Jianxin's weak figure and his young age didn't look like a powerful cultivator. "Brat, since you don't know what's good for you, I'll let your big brother monkey teach you a good lesson so that you'll remember." After saying that, Gan Ho directly slapped towards Jianxin's face. Before the slap arrived, the violent wind caused by the slap caused Jianxin's hair to tremble slightly. From this, it could be seen that Gan Ho's slap wasn't light. A cold light flashed through Jianxin's eyes. He immediately snorted coldly and grabbed a pair of chopsticks with his right hand. With lightning speed, he stabbed towards Gan Ho's incoming slap. Jianxin's right hand moved extremely quickly. It was so fast that it was difficult for others to catch sight of it. Before Gan Ho could react, Jianxin's right hand had already made contact with Gan Ho's palm. When the two came into contact, the chopsticks in Jianxin's right hand were like sharp iron spikes that easily pierced through Gan Ho's palm. Ah! The excruciating pain from his palm caused Gan Ho to let out a cry of agony. His voice was mournful, and it reverberated through the entire restaurant. Everyone could hear it clearly. Immediately, many gasps of surprise rang out in the restaurant. This result was clearly very different from what they had expected. Everyone in the restaurant cast surprised glances at Jianxin. However, when some of the more discerning people saw that Jianxin had pierced Gan Ho's palm with a chopstick, their expressions immediately became grave. Subsequently, their gazes towards Jianxin also changed slightly. Many of their gazes were filled with deep shock. What kind of strength did it take to pierce a palm with a wooden chopstick? At the very least, none of them could do it. After piercing Gan Ho's palm with the chopstick, Jianxin suddenly kicked out with his right leg. He ruthlessly kicked Gan Ho's chest, sending his frail body flying 3 meters away. In the end, he crashed over a table and fell to the ground in a sorry state. The few mercenaries sitting at that table immediately distanced themselves from the restaurant in fear of being implicated. Although Xianxia didn't seem very old, the strength and ruthlessness he displayed at this moment had deterred many people in the restaurant. The few mercenaries sitting at that table naturally wouldn't fall out with Xianxia over such a small matter. Seeing Gan Ho's fate, the 4 mercenaries who came with Gan Ho were clearly stunned for a moment. However, they quickly recovered and glared at Xianxia, their eyes filled with killing intent. You actually dare to make a move against our grand desert mercenary group? Are you tired of living? A young man's face was filled with anger as he angrily shouted at Xianxia. Before he finished speaking, a large sword suddenly appeared in his hand and he waved it towards Xianxia. The corner of Xianxia's mouth curled up into a sneer. Then, with a light snort, a slender silver sword appeared in his hand. Near the hilt of the sword, 2 words were engraved on the surface of the sword: Breeze. The Breeze sword was the divine sword that Xianxia used in his previous life. It was Xianxia's personal sword and was extremely famous in Jianghu. Anyone who practiced martial arts would know of it. In this life, Xianxia had reincarnated into this world and was still using the Breeze sword. Moreover, the shape of the Breeze sword was exactly the same as the one he used in his previous life. From this, it could be seen just how deep Xianxia's feelings toward swords were. As soon as the Breeze sword appeared, under Xianxia's control, it transformed into a silver bolt of lightning and pierced towards the young man at an unbelievable speed. When the young man's sword was halfway there, the Breeze sword was like a ghost as it suddenly appeared in front of his throat. The tip of the sword had already pierced through the outer layer of skin on the young man's throat, revealing a dark red stain. Feeling a slight pain in his throat, the young man's face changed greatly. In an instant, his face became as white as a sheet of paper without a trace of blood. Drops of cold sweat began to form on his forehead and covered his entire forehead in a blink of an eye. The large sword in his hand was also stopped in midair under his control. His body was still in the same position as before, not daring to move in the slightest. At this moment, the young man's appearance was as if he had been imprisoned by a mysterious force. Looking at the silver sword that had appeared in front of the young man's throat, the originally noisy restaurant suddenly fell into a strange silence. Everyone's eyes were wide open as they stared at the Breeze sword in Xianxia's hand. Their eyes were filled with disbelief and disbelief. As for how the sword had appeared in front of the young man's throat, only 2 or 3 people in the restaurant could vaguely catch a glimpse of it. Most of them didn't even see the silver sword. All they saw was a flash of white light that was extremely fast. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. A moment later, the sound of people sucking in a breath of cold air could be heard in the quiet restaurant. At this moment, everyone in the restaurant looked at Xianxia with deep shock in their eyes. The young man whose throat was held by Xianxia did not dare to move. It was as if he was afraid that if he moved, the sword would pierce through his throat. "Little brother, please be merciful. We are from the Desert Mercenary Group. This matter is our fault. We hope that you can let our companion go." At this time, a middle-aged man opened his mouth to speak. His tone was extremely gentle and even the expression on his face was one of sincerity. Hearing this, Xianxia glanced at the middle-aged man. After hesitating for a moment, he slowly put down the Breeze sword in his hand and coldly said, "Scram." Hearing this, the young man whose throat was held by Xianxia had a flash of anger in his eyes. But since he had just escaped death, he didn't dare to say anything. When the Breeze sword disappeared from his hand, Xianxia's cold gaze swept over the few people. Immediately, he took out a gold coin from his dimensional storage and threw it on the table. His voice was calm as he said, "Waiter, the bill." Following this, Xianxia directly walked out of the restaurant. After what had happened, Xianxia didn't have the heart to continue staying here. Moreover, after eating and drinking, his stomach was already full. Then, before Xianxia had even taken a few steps, the middle-aged man who had spoken to Xianxia had a murderous look in his eyes. Immediately, he looked at the other 3 people and nodded. Then, as if they had already discussed this beforehand, The four of them each took out a weapon and attacked Jianshan from different directions. Feeling the movement behind him, Jianshan's eyes turned cold. A strong murderous look flashed in his eyes as his body slightly swayed. Just as the weapons were about to hit him, Jianshan's body had already moved 2 meters forward at an extremely fast speed, dodging the attack range of the weapons behind him. At the same time, the light wind sword appeared in his right hand. Jianshan abruptly turned around and faced the four people. Taking a step forward, he closed the distance between himself and the four people. His right hand suddenly shook and the light wind sword was thrust towards the middle-aged man closest to him. Following a flash of white light, the light wind sword had already closed in on the middle-aged man's body and was heading towards his throat. This middle-aged man's strength was clearly not weak. At the very least, he was much stronger than the young man from before. Seeing Jianshan's light wind sword coming towards him, the middle-aged man's face immediately became serious. Immediately, he used the fastest speed he could muster to pull back his sword and block in front of his throat. Ding! Just as the middle-aged man finished his action, the tip of the light wind sword had already pierced through the middle-aged man's palm-sized sword. Following a metallic sound, a shallow mark appeared on the surface of the sword. With his sword blocked, Jianshan's face revealed a trace of ridicule. His eyes flashed and in the next moment, the light wind sword's blade suddenly exploded with a hazy light. Although it wasn't very strong, the hidden sharpness was felt by many people in the restaurant. Following that, Jianshan's foot kicked off the ground and at the same time his body twisted. His entire body was suspended in the air in a straight line as he quickly rotated. The light wind sword also rotated under the influence of Jianshan's spinning speed. At the tip of the sword, a powerful sword chi was released. Following an extremely unpleasant sound, the light wind sword rotated at an extremely fast speed. The powerful piercing force from the light wind sword drilled a 2-finger-wide hole into the middle-aged man's sword. Then, the light wind sword continued to penetrate the middle-aged man's sword like a hot knife through butter. Finally, under the middle-aged man's shocked gaze, the light wind sword pierced through his throat. Lightly landing on the ground, Jianshan's movements were calm and unrestrained. Immediately after, he pulled out the light wind sword from the middle-aged man's throat. Without hesitation, before the other three people could react, the light wind sword once again turned into a silver bolt of lightning and pierced towards the young man who had attacked him before. Pooh! Facing Jianshan's extremely fast sword, the young man who was much weaker than the middle-aged man had no way of resisting. Before he could even react, the light wind sword had already pierced through his throat, causing fresh red blood to spurt out. In less than a breath's time, Jianshan had successfully killed 2 people. This kind of speed made everyone in the restaurant unable to believe their eyes. Chapter 84. The actions of the two startled all the bystanders in the restaurant. However, they didn't think much of it. In the Tianyuan continent, there were all kinds of people. There were some who would rather throw away their lives than admit their mistakes. There were also some who were afraid of death who would do anything when their lives were in danger, even betraying their brothers and friends. Jianshan slowly lowered the light wind sword and pointed it at the ground. His eyes were cold as he looked at the 2 begging mercenaries. His eyebrows slightly wrinkled as he looked at them with a look of disdain. Towards people who were afraid of death, Jianshan hated them the most. Seeing Jianshan lower his sword, the 2 begging mercenaries thought that Jianshan was really going to let them go. Their faces couldn't help but reveal a trace of joy. But before they could be happy for long, a cold and indifferent sentence caused their happy faces to freeze. I already gave you a chance before, but unfortunately, you didn't cherish it. Now, begging for mercy is already too much. A deep and cold voice came out from Jianshan's mouth. As soon as he finished speaking, Jianshan's right hand suddenly turned into a blur and swept out. Under the control of his arm, the light wind sword in his right hand turned into a silver bolt of lightning and pierced towards the 2 mercenaries. Before the 2 mercenaries could even react, the sharp edge of the light wind sword had already cut through their necks, leaving behind a thin line of blood. In the next moment, a large amount of blood flowed out from the small wound and dyed their necks red. If the two mercenaries had resisted, then it would have been impossible for Xianxia to kill them without a bit of effort. If they were lucky, then they might have been able to escape from Xianxia's hands. Unfortunately, they had already been frightened by Xianxia's lightning-fast killing of two of their companions. The fear in their hearts had caused them to lose all will to resist, which was why they were so easily killed by Xianxia. After effortlessly killing the two mercenaries, Xianxia's body flickered as he once again appeared in front of the last mercenary. The light wind sword in his hand turned into a silver ray of light as it sliced through the mercenary's neck. In just a few breaths of time, the 5 mercenaries of the Great Desert Mercenary Group had all died at the hands of Xianxia. After killing the 5 mercenaries, Xianxia's expression didn't change in the slightest. He then took out a few gold coins from his spatial belt and indifferently said, "These gold coins can be considered as your cleanup fee." With that said, Xianxia calmly walked out of the restaurant. The Tianyuan continent was an extremely cruel world. Here, there were conflicts and killings occurring everywhere. The people of the Tianyuan continent had long since become accustomed to these kinds of things. Although a massacre had occurred in the restaurant, to the diners of the restaurant, as long as it didn't involve them, it was completely fine. The bloody scene didn't affect their appetite at all. Watching Xianxia leave, the entire restaurant fell into a strange silence. At this moment, everyone forgot to eat as they stared blankly at the direction in which Xianxia had left and at the 5 dead mercenaries. From their eyes, one could see the shock and disbelief in their eyes. After a long while, the sound of a cold breath being sucked in could be heard from the quiet restaurant. Following that, a voice filled with amazement could be heard. What a fast sword! Not only was it so fast that people couldn't react to it, but it also had such precise control. This is the first time I've seen such a thing in all my years in the Tianyuan continent. The one who spoke was a middle-aged man wearing a blue robe. At the same time, he was also one of the few people in the restaurant who could vaguely see the sword's shadow. This person doesn't look old, but his strength isn't weak. Moreover, his attacks are very ruthless, directly killing with one strike. It seems like he isn't someone from a big family, or he has a very powerful master behind him. I wonder what his name is. With his strength, it would be great if he could join our mercenary group. At that time, our mercenary group's strength would increase by quite a lot, a young man softly murmured. With that, a person who seemed to be around the same age as the young man beside him said, "All right, stop dreaming. He seems much younger than you, yet he possesses such strength. A person like him definitely doesn't have a simple identity. A small mercenary group like ours can't attract an expert like him. Moreover, he killed 5 members of the Grand Desert Mercenary Group here, so they definitely won't let this matter go. If he really does join us, he might even cause us a lot of trouble. After all, a small mercenary group like ours is not the opponent of the Grand Desert Mercenary Group that has over 1,000 people." After leaving the restaurant, Xianxia directly went to the Mercenary Trade Union. He found a mission to escort a caravan and accepted it. Fortunately, the mission Xianxia accepted wasn't far, so with his mercenary rank, he was still able to accept the mission. Wake City was a 3rd-grade city. Although it was only a 3rd-grade city, its tall and thick walls were comparable to a 1st-grade city's. This was because in a mountain range not far from Wake City lived a large number of magic beasts. These magic beasts would often attack the city on a large scale, so even though Wake City was only a 3rd-grade city, its walls were extremely sturdy. This was also to prevent magic beast attacks. At noon, the fiery red sun in the sky emitted a dazzling light. The intense light made it difficult for people to raise their heads to look at the sky. Many mercenaries who walked on the road half closed their eyes to reduce the sun's irritation to their eyes. Outside of Wake City, a caravan of 200 to 300 people was slowly advancing on the main road towards the city gates that weren't very tall. This damned weather, why is it so hot? How can we live like this? In the caravan, a half-naked man couldn't help but curse. As he spoke, he took out a water bottle and fiercely gulped down a few mouthfuls of water. Not far from the burly man, A young man dressed in simple and coarse clothes was sitting on a white horse with his eyes closed. Looking at his serene appearance, it was as if he had fallen asleep. The youth's appearance was very ordinary. He was the kind of person that could be easily found in a crowd. From his appearance, he seemed to be in his 20s. Although the sun was high in the sky, the youth still covered his entire body tightly. Although his clothes weren't too thick, it wasn't something that an ordinary person could bear. The most surprising thing was that there wasn't a single drop of sweat on the youth's forehead. Compared to the half-naked mercenaries and merchants in the caravan, this youth's appearance was clearly different. Although many mercenaries and merchants kept looking at the youth with strange gazes, none of them went up to talk to him. This youth was Xianxia. Chapter 85. After successfully escorting the caravan to Wake City, Xianxia left the caravan and went directly to the mercenary trade union to turn in the mission. He received a certain amount of honor points and a small amount of money. Because Wake City was close to the magical Beast Mountain range, there were many more mercenaries here than in other cities. Most of the mercenaries here valued the good geographical environment and stayed here for long periods of time. It was convenient for them to enter the magical Beast Mountain range and hunt magical beasts for money. Although hunting magical beasts was much more dangerous than escorting caravans, it was still a way to make a lot of money. Even though there were people who died at the hands of magical beasts every day, the high value of monster cores and the huge demand for them made many mercenaries put their lives on the line and risk their lives to hunt magical beasts. After all, monster cores were far too precious on the Tianyuan continent. Almost everyone needed them, and the demand for them was extremely high. Once one obtained a monster core, one could directly absorb the energy within the monster core to increase one's cultivation speed. Furthermore, even if one did not use the monster core, one could still exchange it for a considerable amount of money. The mercenary trade union was very noisy, and there were many mercenaries inside. The large trade union was filled with hundreds of people, and most of them were topless. Their strong physiques and defined muscles were exposed in front of everyone, as if they were showing off their strength. In this hot weather, the mercenary trade union's ventilation wasn't very advanced. A sour and pungent smell of sweat pervaded the air, causing Xianxia, who rarely smelled this kind of smell, to furrow his brows and cover his nose with one hand. After leaving the mercenary trade union, Xianxia casually restocked in the city and bought a map of the magical Beast Mountain range. He then directly left Wake City and headed towards the magical Beast Mountain range alone under the scorching sun. The mountain range of magical beasts was only about 30 kilometers away from Wake City. Xianxia rode his white horse and galloped for 2 hours before finally arriving at the edge of the mountain range of magical beasts. At the edge of the magical Beast Mountain range was a forest, and in the depths of the forest was a vast mountain range. Not only did the mountain range contain a large number of magical beasts, but the environment was also extremely vile. According to the description of the magical Beast Mountain range on the map, the forest was filled with poisonous snakes and insects, and swamps were everywhere. The slightest carelessness could cause one to fall into a swamp. Without the help of teammates, it would be very difficult to escape with one's life. As the saying goes, danger and opportunity coexist. Although the magical Beast Mountain range is very dangerous, at the same time, there is also a certain amount of opportunity. In the magical Beast Mountain range, there are often magical beasts that kill each other for various reasons. And these magical beasts that are killed by their own kind usually have their magic cores intact. If one's luck is good enough, one can even come across 1 or 2 corpses that still have their magic cores intact. However, such a probability is very small. It's not that magic cores are useless to magical beasts, but those low-level magical beasts don't have any intelligence. All their actions are based on their bestial instincts, so they simply don't know how to use magic cores. Xianxia sat on the horse's back, raising his head to look at the lush forest in front of him. He murmured, "In the future, this forest will become a training ground." After saying that, Xianxia directly dismounted from the horse's back, reaching out his hand to gently stroke the horse's head. He didn't care if this white horse that had followed him for a few days could understand his words. He said in a low voice, "Go. In the future, you are free. You can go wherever you want." After saying that, Jianshan turned and strode into the forest. Hiss! The white horse behind him fiercely dug one of its front hooves into the ground. Staring at Jianshan's back, it let out a long neigh, as if bidding farewell to Jianshan. After walking for a distance, Jianshan finally stepped into the forest. Then, without stopping, he continued to walk into the depths of the forest, towards the Magic Beast Mountain range. Weeds were everywhere in the forest. Everywhere was half a person's height or even taller than a person's height, completely blocking one's line of sight. In such an environment, the slightest carelessness would cause one to lose their way. Jianshan walked a certain distance, leaping onto a large tree to observe the surrounding path, ensuring that he wouldn't stray or lose his way. And within the weeds, poisonous snakes would appear from time to time, but they would all be discovered by the exceptionally powerful god, Jianshan first, easily dealing with them. After walking for 4 hours, Jianshan finally arrived at the depths of the forest. And here, a few fierce wild beasts gradually appeared. At this moment, a dark green figure leapt out from the weeds, attacking Jianshan's back with extreme speed. Then, just as this dark green figure approached Jianshan's body, a silver-white light flashed and a bright silver longsword suddenly appeared, accurately piercing the dark green figure's body at an even faster speed. The longsword was withdrawn upon contact. Then, Jianshan's feet swayed slightly, his body moving half a meter to the side. Just as he moved, a light "pung" sounded, and this dark green figure fell where Jianshan had just been standing. It was only at this moment that he could clearly see that this dark green figure was actually a wild beast that looked like a leopard. At its neck, there was already blood dripping. There was a deep bloody hole, and torrential blood was surging out of it. Jianshan's gaze swept over this leopard-like wild beast lying on the ground, and then continued to hurry into the depths of the forest. He could see at a glance that this was only a wild beast, not even a first-rank magical beast. There was no magic core in its body at all, otherwise, it wouldn't have been so easily killed by him. Roar! Whoa! As Jianshan continued to go deeper into the forest, the roars of magical beasts gradually sounded out from all around the forest. There were all kinds of strange sounds, some of which were unpleasant to the ears, and some even sounded like the howls of evil spirits, causing one's hair to stand on end. At this moment, Jianshan's footsteps paused, and he turned his head slightly, his eyes flashing with a sharp light as he stared at his side, the silver-white light wind sword appearing in his hand. This was the first time that Jianshan had shown such a serious expression since entering the forest. From where Jianshan's eyes were looking, a faint rustling sound could be heard, and then a yellow scorpion gradually appeared in front of Jianshan's eyes. This scorpion was very large. Just its body alone was 1 meter wide, 2 meters long, and the poisonous hook hanging from its tail was 5 to 6 meters long. On its head, there was a pair of small green eyes that flashed with a strange light. The scorpion flew straight towards Jianshan, and finally stopped 5 meters away from Jianshan. Its pair of eyes flashed with a strange light as it stared at Jianshan, and then it waved its pincers while letting out the "yi" sound. The silver-white light wind sword in Jianshan's hand was shrouded in a layer of hazy sword aura, and he immediately made his move. His body turned into a blur as he shot towards the scorpion, the light wind sword in his hand pointing straight at it. He had originally come here to hunt magical beasts, so now that he saw one, he naturally wouldn't hold back. The scorpion's reaction wasn't slow either, and just as Jianshan moved, the poisonous hook on its tail turned into a blur as it stabbed towards Jianshan with extreme speed. Ding! Jianshan's light wind sword collided with the scorpion's poisonous hook, and along with the sound of metal colliding, the strong recoil from the collision caused Jianshan's light wind sword and the scorpion's poisonous hook to be pulled back at the same time. Jianshan's body slightly swayed, and he had already retreated a few meters. His eyes were filled with surprise as he looked at the scorpion's poisonous hook. The hardness of this poisonous hook was beyond his expectations, and according to his calculations, even ordinary iron would not be able to compare to the hardness of this scorpion's poisonous hook. Moreover, the strength of this poisonous hook was also very great. After the collision with the poisonous hook, Xianxia felt a burst of numbness in his arms. Chapter 86. Although Xianxia had killed quite a few Class 2 magical beasts in Kargath Academy, the Class 2 magical beasts there were far inferior to the magical beasts native to the mountain range of magical beasts. The Class 2 magical beasts in Kargath Academy might not even be comparable to some of the Class 1 magical beasts in the mountain range of magical beasts, let alone a Class 2 magical beast native to the mountain range. While Xianxia was in a daze, the scorpion didn't give him any time to think. Its 6 thick and powerful legs dug into the ground, and in the blink of an eye, it had crossed the distance of several meters and arrived in front of Xianxia. It opened its huge pincers that glowed with a poisonous green light, aiming for Xianxia's head. This was the first time that Xianxia was facing a magic beast that was born and bred in the magical beast mountain range, so he didn't dare to be careless. Although he had never met a magic beast that was born and bred in the magical beast mountain range, he understood this principle very well. Xianxia's face became a little serious. He tilted his head slightly, dodging the scorpion's pincers by a hair's breadth. He then stomped on the ground, leaving behind a deep footprint. His body was already shooting towards the scorpion's head, which was much smaller than its body. The light wind sword in his hand was covered in a layer of hazy white light, and the tip of the sword was about to reach the scorpion's small eyes. The eyes, throat, and heart were the 3 weak points of any creature. Xianxia was very clear on this point. At this moment, because of the angle of the scorpion's neck, it would be very difficult to stab it. Moreover, the scorpion's neck was not very long, so Xianxia could only choose to attack the scorpion's eyes. Although Xianxia had a lot of confidence in his attacks, some magic beasts also had very strong defenses. Xianxia wasn't 100% sure that he would be able to pierce through the scorpion's neck and injure it. Xianxia's speed was very fast. All that could be seen was a flash of silver lightning, and the tip of his sword was already in front of the scorpion's eyes. Just as Xianxia's light wind sword was about to pierce the scorpion's eyes, the scorpion suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a pungent green poison. It was as if it was being controlled by a mysterious force, and quickly enveloped Xianxia. At the same time, the scorpion's eyes suddenly closed, and its head shook with all its might to avoid Xianxia's light wind sword. Xianxia's light wind sword was incomparably fast. At this critical moment, even though the scorpion tried his best to dodge, he still couldn't completely avoid it. In the end, the light wind sword pierced through the scorpion's eyes. When the light wind sword came into contact with the scorpion's closed eyes, it stopped for a moment. But in the next moment, the light wind sword's sharp sword chi broke through the scorpion's defenses and successfully pierced through the scorpion's eyes. At the same time, Xianxia's entire body was covered by the green poison mist. Hiss! With the corner of his eye injured, the intense pain caused Scorpion to let out a very unpleasant and hoarse cry. Dark green liquid slowly flowed out from the wound in his eye. In his wide-open mouth, the sharp and small needle-like teeth that were exposed looked so terrifying. The poison mist slightly swayed, and the shrouded Xianxia retreated with lightning speed. Compared to before, Xianxia's current appearance was like the difference between heaven and earth. His entire body was covered with a layer of dark green poison, and the coarse clothes he wore were rapidly dissolving. Even the hair on his head that was originally not very long had turned into strands of green silk. Feeling the burning pain from his body, Xianxia's face became very serious. What a strong poison! After saying this, Xianxia quickly tore off the coarse clothes on his body that had been corroded by the poison. He then used his Saint Chi to resist the poison's damage. Xianxia glanced at the blinded poison scorpion who constantly cried out in pain. He understood that this was the perfect opportunity to kill poison scorpion. Afterwards, a powerful killing intent flashed through his eyes. He did not even bother to take out new clothes from his space ring and put them on. Just like that, he charged forward with his sword naked and continued to attack poison scorpion. Xianxia's footsteps were light and nimble as he quickly arrived at Scorpion's side. With a shake of his arm, he extended it forward with lightning speed. The light wind sword in his hand turned into a silver light and pierced toward Scorpion's throat. The moment the light wind sword pierced out, the sword suddenly exploded with a powerful sword chi. Although it wasn't very strong, the sword chi was as sharp as a blade. It was as if a bolt of lightning had flashed through the air, leaving behind a dazzling radiance in the world. In the blink of an eye, it had disappeared without a trace. Ding! Xianxia's light wind sword accurately pierced through Scorpion's throat. When the tip of the light wind sword came into contact with the fine scales on Scorpion's neck, it let out a crisp sound like metal clashing against metal. However, these scales were not weak and only managed to block the light wind sword for a moment. In the next moment, the sword chi from the light wind sword had already pierced through the scales and pierced deep into Scorpion's throat. Hiss! Scorpion once again let out a hoarse cry. In his one good eye, a demonic green light continuously pulsed. His pair of thick and powerful pincers quickly clamped down on Xianxia. The 5 or 6 meter long poisonous hook on his back turned into a phantom as it circled around Xianxia's head and pierced towards the back of Xianxia's head. Xianxia pulled out the light wind sword from Scorpion's throat and jumped up onto Scorpion's back. Hiss! Hiss! Scorpion was clearly annoyed that Xianxia had jumped onto his back. His body began to violently sway left and right as he let out an unpleasant hiss while waving his pincers in front of him. Judging from Scorpion's current state, Xianxia's attack on his throat did not seem to have caused him much damage. Looking at Scorpion, who was still as vigorous as ever, Xianxia's eyebrows slightly wrinkled. He could not help but say in a deep voice, "His life is really strong. He actually didn't die." Because Scorpion's body was too large and Xianxia was limited by his own strength, he could not think of any other way to deal with Scorpion other than attacking its eyes and throat. At this time, Xianxia heard a slight sound piercing through the air. Hearing this sound, Xianxia did not hesitate and dodged to the side. Just as Xianxia dodged, a poisonous hook that flickered with a jade-green light had already pierced through his scalp. In the end, it stabbed into the Scorpion's own back. With a light sound, Scorpion's back was covered with a layer of armor that was not weak. In front of the sharp poison hook, it was easily pierced through. The sharp poison hook pierced deep into Scorpion's body, causing dark green blood to violently flow out. Seeing this scene, Xianxia's expression became sluggish. However, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. He really did not think that Scorpion would be so stupid as to actually injure itself. The Scorpion tried to pull out the poisonous hook, but because the barbs on the poisonous hook had pierced deeply into its flesh, it pulled out some of its flesh. The Scorpion was in so much pain that it kept screaming in pain. Its whole body was trembling, and the intense pain made it give up on the idea of pulling the poisonous hook out of its body. Every time a person or creature was seriously injured, there would be a buffer period. During this period of time, their strength and reaction speed would be the most clumsy. Xianxia saw this and took advantage of the opportunity to flip in the air and jump down from Scorpion's back. The light wind sword in his hand turned into a silver light as it pierced toward Scorpion's other eye. At this time, Scorpion's reaction speed was much slower than usual due to the intense pain coming from his back. Furthermore, Xianxia's sword was extremely fast. In Scorpion's current state, it was very difficult for him to dodge or block Xianxia's lightning-fast sword. The light wind sword did not stop and accurately pierced into Scorpion's other eye. Xianxia's face lit up with joy. He immediately used more strength in his hands to push the light wind sword deeper into Scorpion's eye. In the end, half of the light wind sword's length had pierced into Scorpion's eye, injuring its brain. This time, Scorpion no longer struggled or resisted. His entire body trembled violently a few times before his legs gave way. His huge body that was more than a meter tall fell to the ground with a loud thud. Xianxia slowly pulled out the light wind sword. Looking at the sword that had been dyed green by the Scorpion's green blood and white blood, he couldn't help but frown. With a thought, the light wind sword fell from the sword and returned to its original appearance. Xianxia's eyes scanned the corpse of Scorpion a few times before he waved the light wind sword towards its head. But just as the light windsword was about to hit the scorpion's head, it was blocked. Although the scorpion was already dead, its shell was still very strong. Xianxia's casual attack was unable to break through its defense. Welcome to Legends of Cultivation audiobooks, where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality.